Then I realized the more you bundle, the more you save on insurance with it. Then I realized the more you bundle, the more you save.
It's like you're talking my love language.
I've been taking word.
It's like you're talking my love language.
I've been taking word.
It's like you're talking my love language.
I've been taking word.
It's like you're talking my love language.
I've been taking word.
If a strand of your hair looks like 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 find the turn it off button. I couldn't find the turn it off button. Ah, there. I also had my own volume on my Twitch. Ah! Happy Thursday! Thanks so much for the sound check, Robin. I think Druid's not here today, so I always appreciate when you hop in. So, it is Thursday, February, what is this? February 12th? Oh. Thanks, Robin. Thursday, February 12th, 2026. We're a month and a half into this year, and I feel like I have lived a lifetime in the past, like, I don't know however many days that is. What, 45 or 46 days? Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I'm back here at my desk. You guys that have been following along, if you follow both me, Cake TV, and Quilt Nerding with me and Jill, you know I've been traveling. I did get back on Tuesday, so Quilt Nerding was here from my desk, and it's just been a busy week. Just, you know, I mean, as you know, whether it's for business or pleasure, when you're away from home, things pile up. And, you know, if you're gone 5 days, it takes you 10 days to catch up. If you're gone 10 days, oh my gosh, I might as well not get caught up, right? So my last 2 days have been really nuts. And, you know, lots of news going on in the United States right now between true crime stories, the nuts stuff that's going on with our government, and social issues. I won't get into it. You guys know I don't like to go down those rabbit holes, but wow. I guess CNN has been having a field day because it is constant. You know, the 24-hour news cycle has been just chock full. So it starts to give you whiplash. You know, I remember back in the day, you know, it'd be really interesting when, you know, things were just like rolling on a 24-hour news cycle. But I feel like, you know, I talked about this, I think, a while back about like the concept of the poly crisis, you know, what we've been living through. I mean, really pre-COVID, but since the pandemic, it's like one thing after another, and it's like you can't get away from it. And I talked about this sort of a bunch back in January. You know, I kind of said, like, you kind of have to sort of put your blinders on, or sort of stay in your lane and pay attention to what is important to you and what you feel you have like some skin in the game on. And yeah, it does just gets exceedingly harder when there's just, you know, I just have to turn the TV off. I have to turn off social media. And I will say, because I was away from home and I did have activities with me, I had some books to read, I had some research and projects to work on. You know, it's not like I was sitting there bored. I am never bored. But sometimes you get in a rut, and I was going to social media this past weekend. I was on social media like pretty much as I was awake, I was on social media, and I that was bad. I got into that rut, and that's not good. Because it just like it's a challenge. So anyway, I'm glad to be here with you guys. So, I thought, first of all, we haven't seen Babraham in a while, and you know, February and his birthday. I think today is it the 12th? I think that February 12th is Abraham Lincoln's birthday. Ergo, Babraham also celebrates his birthday. You know, he showed up with his suave sweater. Unfortunately, he has to wear it draped, you know, like all preppy and such, because it won't fit over his big ceramic noggin. So, nonetheless, you know, poor Babraham, he's sort of just been languishing. He doesn't have any new clothing. I'm gonna have to rectify that as I get some time. And you know, you gotta come back. You gotta get back into it, Babraham. Like, we've missed you. Yeah. Okay. You know, and you guys know the miniatures and the dolls and the toys and things are what keep me sane, and that's probably part of it. I didn't have any dolls and toys and fabric and things with me. I just had books and stuff that I was kind of like, I'm tired of this. So I guess I probably need to have like my go bag, you know, if I have to leave home for an extended period again. I just take a go bag of miniatures and doll clothes and things, and I can just play. I know it sounds insane, but it's like, it's the things that, you know, capture your mind and kind of give you a sense of relief and happiness. And,
I think there's too many people today that don't have those things, or don't take time to find them, or have lost them. Um, I mean, I guess just kind of case in point, I have to be a little bit careful about, not using names and things like that. But within a community I belong to, there is this person. Talked to her online, never met her in person. She has nothing nice to say ever, ever. Like never, never, ever, ever. All communication with her is about how something has gone wrong. She's mad about something. She's just pre-planning for things to go wrong. She doesn't like this. She doesn't like that. And that kind of stuff just wears on you. And I'm like, get a hobby, for crying out loud. Like, quit filling my inbox with your nastiness. And I just, I'm like, everybody, we all love to complain at times, right? Because, complaining, sometimes it feels good because people are like, yeah, I feel the same way. And you kind of like, yeah, it's that camaraderie, and it's like you get things off your chest. And there's some, I think there's some psychological, I don't want to say it's all good, but there's some psychological relief in that. And I think being able to vent to people, friends, your loved ones, whatever, your community, is good. But there just comes a point where it's not helpful anymore. And it's certainly not good for you. It's not solving any problems. It's really annoying other people. And frankly, there comes a point when it's not just annoying. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with a person that doesn't see the error in their ways of never being positive or supportive. And if that's not in your heart, if it's not your inclination to be positive and supportive, and you really struggle to find anything positive and supportive to contribute to a community, a conversation on social media, like, how about just shut your trap? you know like when I very, very long time ago, I've been a manager, I've managed people, and on my teams, I always said, my door is open to you. If you have a problem, if you have a question, if you have a complaint, I am always here for you. If you need to vent, and I'm lucky to have had bosses that were the same way. But one of the things I always said to my team is, if you bring me a problem, bring me a solution. And it doesn't mean that we're going to adopt your solution. It doesn't mean that, you're necessarily right. But when you come and say, look, I have a problem with XYZ, or this thing happened, I didn't like it, or it created a customer service issue, or it, created this problem, I would always say, what's your solution? Because I think that sometimes, that's where people like to be heard. And, sometimes that's where we do get like really great solutions from, is listening to people. Not everybody has a great solution all the time. I know I've come up with hundreds of solutions that lots of other people poked holes in, and that's we learn from that. But yeah, there comes a point when it's like, you have to, I personally just have to like divorce myself of people that, just don't have the capacity, or just don't want to bring anything positive. Because it just gets like, ugh. So Robin said, let's see, I recently told one of my best friends that she isn't happy unless she has something to bitch about. Exactly. Some people just thrive on drama. That's their fuel. I'm fueled by, milk chocolate and gummy candy. Some people are fueled by drama and just pissing and moaning. And I hate that. Yeah, she does nothing but complain about the same things over and over and over. Yeah. I know so many people like that. I have friends, I have loved ones, and it's like it's like the record player, just same old, same old, same old, same old. And I think it's particularly hard when it is a friend or a loved one. Not somebody that's just like an acquaintance in your community. It's tough. And I think it's tough love, but I think people need to be told that. And I think sometimes they don't realize. I've truly seen situations where people just, they get into this mode. I mean, think about yourself. Think about, what are some things that you do kind of automatically. For some people, it's your morning routine. You have to get to work, childcare, whatever it is you do in your daytime. And you kind of just autopilot it a lot of the time. You know, you get up, you brush your teeth, you go to the bathroom, you make coffee, you take a shower, you know, put your clothes on, like all those things, you kind of do them in, um, you know, without thinking too much. And I think that's the way some people get, like they get this, like, it's just this mindset and they cannot break out of it. The groove is so deep that they don't realize it's happening, or even if they have some self-awareness and realize it's happening, they either can't transcend it or they don't want to. And I'm sorry, but I struggle with that. And I really have had to kind of push people out that, you know, have sort of taken hours of my life, days of my life, even with stuff like that. It's just, it's miserable. It just makes other people miserable. So, and, you know, our society doesn't help a lot. You know, like I said, the news cycle, you know, I mean, all the divisive politics in our country and in other countries. I mean, it's the US, certainly we're a hotbed of nonsense right now. But you know, I can look at other places throughout the world and, you know, lots of friends here who are international. And you have the same problems too. You have the same craziness going on. And it's like society's got some problems. My hope is, you know, and I've been saying this for a while, that, you know, I always hear about like the dawning of the age of Aquarius. You know, they've been saying it since the 60s. You know, to us, it seems so long ago, but I think in the terms of like eons and millennia, we've been in this time of like massive social upheaval over decades. And it's like it gets faster and faster and faster and faster, because it's very closely related to technology in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm always like, every morning I wake up, I'm kind of like, deep breath, what's going to happen today? So I guess that kind of brings me to my AI conversation. Kind of maybe seems like I sort of dropped AI, haven't been talking about it much. I have not. I am still firmly entrenched in AI's here. What can we do about it? Not much. What we can do, though, is to learn how to identify and see the places where we don't have much choice, see the places where we do have choice, and act accordingly. And I do think that I mean, we are in this like really weird time. All last year was like the AI bubble. They keep talking about the bubble. Has the bubble popped? No. I just think things are changing so rapidly. It's like the bubble inflates and it deflates a little bit and inflates a little bit. So it hasn't gotten to that like, ooh, psh, the way that the dot bomb did in like what, 99, 2000. So it's, I guess I'd kind of likened it to that. And I think it's maybe a little bit different. And so every day I kind of, just like waking up and going, what's going to happen today in our society? I read the articles and I look at the things coming across my feed, and you know, I think about, is this for real? How does this affect me? How does this affect us? One thing I did, you know, you guys know I did some just general sort of AI training, AI lecture kind of stuff for some organizations. And there's a lot of hype out there. You know, they keep saying, oh, I don't know how many times I've seen the deadline, these headlines, you know, and I just saw one today. I haven't read the article yet, but it was, you know, AI CEO expert says that, you know, all white collar jobs will be taken by AI by the end of 2027. Well, that's worrisome, isn't it? Well, it's all a bunch of BS. AI is simply not capable of taking over our jobs. It's capable of taking over parts of our jobs. And I think that companies, as they're laying people off, particularly in white collar professions, they're creating problems for themselves. You know, I think in a lot of cases, and you know, I think we saw this to some degree back in, you know, the early 2000s, where the internet can now do some things and things were quicker and faster, and so it was like, you know, people that were in like the sort of high end of their career, you know, I mean, I guess boomers that were, you know, heading towards retirement saw themselves sort of in trouble. And I think my generation now is seeing ourselves in trouble with AI. But the thing is, as these companies will get rid of people like me that have, I have 20 years of experience in instructional systems development and design, and another like 10 years in human resources. So um, those skills, absolutely, AI can do a lot of it. And of course, I'm embarrassed to say that. It's why I haven't had a whole lot of consulting gigs lately because AI can do it. AI can do a lot of things. And but there has to still be that human in the loop. And you guys may remember I've talked about this a lot. Human in the loop. It's really important that we're there with any kind of AI process to sort of be the watch guard, to be the advice giver, to be the like the final decision, the final authority. And I think that's the piece, of course, that gets missing every time there's some massive catastrophe with AI stuff. Things not working out. And, I think a lot of times what we see as consumers or end users of companies laying off employees, implementing AI to take over some of their jobs, and the remainder of their jobs go to possibly junior employees or new hires, etc. We're just seeing like they're just building incompetence. And what happens is we as consumers and users, etc., end up kind of bearing the brunt, and we have problems, we complain. Companies realize what horrible mistakes they made, and sometimes it's too late. So, I don't mean that to sound like negative, because I do think that there is a positive at the end of this, as we advance. But it's just very painful right now. So as far as AI goes, where I had last talked about AI was, some of the kind of cool things it can do for us. For instance, I indexed or cataloged my bookshelves, all of my quilt history books, quilt study books, just taking pictures and asking AI to pull the info out, put it in a spreadsheet. That is a perfect example of a good way to use AI and how AI can shine. It's taking tedious things that really we don't need to tax our brain over. Like, sure, I could sit on a chair with my laptop in front of my bookshelf and type in the titles and the authors and open the books and look for the publication date and type in the ISBN number. But AI can do it. Saves me many untold hours, right? So I still think that is where AI is valuable to us. And I actually ended my professional account with ChatGPT, and it was really more of a financial issue. But now that they're adding ads, and I saw that coming a long time ago, I was like, no surprise, just like Google search, AI, a lot of people, I think I saw a statistic that it's like 80% of people actually use AI as like a glorified search engine. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just as just your standard Google search can sometimes return stuff where you're like, that's not what I was looking for. AI is the same way. So obviously you can't take any answer AI gives you at face value. You have to evaluate. But I still think things like web search, things like just very simple administrative stuff, AI has gotten so good. Now, some of the things that scare me is where AI has gotten with imagery and video, and really fast. People send me funny cat videos all the time, and I love a cat video. Cat videos number one, dog videos number two. So any kind of fun animal video. And I noticed I get some and I'm like, you do realize this was AI, right? Like, it's funny. It looks like the cat is really smart. It's not. That's AI. So the fact that some of those things are just really, really hard to tell if you don't like use a little critical thinking, that scares me because, think about all the things that have happened just in 2026 here in the US. I don't need to get into the politics of it, but streets of Minneapolis, you start to ask yourself, if I saw something on social media, how can I tell if this clip, because if you look for something that's like long form video, you can almost immediately tell when something is AI, because AI is still not sophisticated enough to like create a complete movie, like where I can go into a space with my phone and I can start recording and I can, do 360 and I can, do all these things. I can zoom in and look. AI can't do that yet. So, when you see a clip of something, a video, you have to really think like, does this have that humanized depth to it, like a real person holding a camera, or their smartphone? Is that what this looks like, or is this something that's been created or manipulated by AI? And I think that when we pair that with speed, we don't always have time. Days go by really fast. We don't have time to look at those things. Lack of critical thinking. No offense. I'm gonna go ahead and say, all quilt nerds and cakelets, anybody that comes to Cake TV, you are brilliant, you are wonderful, you are the smartest people I know because you came to hang out with me. But sadly, a lot of people in society lack critical thinking skills because they were either never taught or they don't have the executive function to employ it very well. And that's, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm saying like, some people are dumb. Some people are dumb. I mean, there's just not a nicer way to say it. Some people simply have not developed the skills. And I mean, I'm not sitting here saying like I'm the smartest person in the world and like, I have it all figured out. There's a lot of places I'm pretty darn dumb too. I'll say things sometimes about, you know, mathematics and sciences and things like this. And my husband will go, "Are you out of your mind? Like, what are you saying? Like, that's stupid. You're dumb." So I don't mean it. I don't mean this at all in a derogatory way, but I think we have to accept the fact that we are not all perfect in all ways. And even if you were the most savvy, careful person, you try to have a critical eye, we can all be duped. Again, when things are moving quickly, we're not taking the time, etc. It's like, I don't have to beat this horse to death. So that's something that really kind of worries me. And all I can do is to keep talking about it. I am all for leaning into AI, but leaning in carefully, and just not saying yes until you know more. And one thing that I've seen lately that's popped up again since the holidays, especially, I think it's really been in the last couple weeks, is the people that are doing it's like a caricature, and they'll say, "Oh, I told ChatGPT to create this picture of me based on everything it knows about me." Y'all, that's a problem. Stop doing that, please. Please, please stop doing that. Because for some of those images to be so good that, I mean, they look like you went down to the boardwalk and you had a very talented caricature artist draw your face. That's what they look like. And they're funny, they're cute. There's a couple of quilting friends that have done them, and I'm like, they're really cute. There's images. ChatGPT has, created their cartoon image. They've created their pets. They've created their office space. They've created all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, the reason it can do that is because you've given it all that information. And it's really good at doing that. Stop giving it all that information. ChatGPT does not know my last name. ChatGPT does not know where I live. ChatGPT has never seen an image of my face. I've never fed it a picture of me. So even though I've told it a lot of things. So it's really, really, really important to be careful and think about how could, and I can get very like, conspiracy theory and dystopian here. I mean, my gosh, you don't want some, adversary, some shadow government or something to have your information, right? You don't want companies that you don't trust to have your information. And the thing is, like, people are just handing it off, right? Yeah. Yeah, Robin, you got it. That stuff is cute and it's fun, but I feel it's dangerous. Again, it's not so much the AI itself, it's that you're handing all of this data to a company that may or may not be utilizing that. We don't necessarily know. Sometimes it's, you're basically signing off your rights when you say, you use these terms of use agreements and such. So be careful about that, please. um, I do know that some of my information's out there just because I have had, I have not had a full-blown identity theft, but I have had some of my information stolen, and it's scary. Um, yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's Google yourself sometime if you've never done it. It's shockingly easy to find information about everybody. Um, the public records, I mean, we champion public records. For those of us that do genealogy, love public records. But public records on living people, um, it's scary. And it's because, I mean, you think about this like 50 years ago, everybody had the telephone book. Everybody's address and phone number was printed on everything. I mean, I think I've told you guys some of the older books I have, from art friends, author friends have their addresses in the books so that you could like write to them. Now today, of course, it's like you want to contact an author, they might have an author's address, web address, website. More than likely you'd have to get in touch with somebody's agent or their publisher to get in touch with an author, right? So, once upon a time public records were not a problem, but they are today. They can be. So these are all the things I think about with AI. Now, here's something interesting that's happening. I think where I sort of left off in the last organizational presentation I did about AI was, generative AI is where we're at with, making these fun image, pictures and the glorified web search, which I got to be honest, sometimes the web search with AI is so much better than just Google, because Google gives you all the sponsored ads and stuff before they give you the real information. I mean, I go to like just something simple like the Maryland Center for History and Culture here in Maryland. It's the museum, Maryland Historical Society. I know the web address. I type the web address in, and instead of just taking me directly there, it gives me like an arm's length worth of sponsored ads that kind of maybe relate. And if I scroll down, then I can find the website. It's useless at this point to me. So I do use AI for, a lot of my web searches, because then you can ask the follow-up question. You could say, oh, okay, so you've answered my question. Now I have this follow-up question, and you can kind of keep that thread. And I sort of like that. And in particular, the, Google Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, they all give you those little, the little link, like this is where I found this stuff. So you can go back and check it. And always, always, always do that because even with legitimate websites, AI still sometimes gets it wrong. It doesn't put the information together properly. So, oh yeah, the sponsored ads. Yeah. Right before ChatGPT, I think is when, and I think I hit my breaking point with Google. And that's where I moved over to Chat, and I've been using Gemini quite a bit now just because it's simple and it's there. It's readily available. So, but generative AI, I think, we love it, hate it. It's here, and people are kind of getting used to it. And I think wrapping their heads around, like, here's where I think I could use it, or I don't want to use it at all, which is fine. Or here's where I want to push back on it. What is the next thing, and like I mentioned this before, is agentic AI. So this is taking generative AI and giving it permission to act on your behalf. And this still scares the bejesus out of me. And to the point of there's a company, and it is on its third name in like a few months, which also I think is a little questionable. It's this startup, Silicon Valley startup. They were called Claudebot, but like claw, like a lobster claw. Do I have my lobster claws here at my desk? Yeah. So like Claudebot was what it was called, or Claude something. And then Anthropic, which owns Claude, Claude, that AI said, hey, could you name it something else? So they named it something else. And now I think, is it Moltbot or something? And now there's this whole idea, like MOLT, like that's this I don't know where that's coming from. Like, I don't know. Um, but anyway, it's on its third name, and essentially it is an agent. But apparently it's a really good agent. Like, it's very efficient. And it's a little bit difficult to set up. So it's not one, like, don't worry, it's not one of those things where if you go look for it, you're going to accidentally hit a button and all of a sudden it has your information. So but it is something where once you install it and get it running, it takes off, but it still can't do some of the basic things. And as an example, the article I read, it was a guy at Wired magazine. They have a whole AI group there that's doing all these testing and stuff with the different products and companies that are coming out. And he basically gave it free reign of he has a number of like Gmail accounts. So he gave it free reign over a particular Gmail account, hooked it up with like, I think he said it was like his grocery account, like his account with Whole Foods, like to buy groceries. And, talk to it about like, here's what's going on with me next week. You can use my credit card. You can, look and check out my regular purchases and just go ahead and buy me a week's worth of groceries. FYI, I have family, friends coming over, whatever. So you could give it this information and it's supposed to build, buy the groceries, check out, have the groceries delivered or whatever. And it couldn't get that far. It kept putting one thing in the cart and trying to buy it over and over and over. And he said, this is where it broke down. It didn't work. But in other aspects, it did work. It crawled all through his Gmail. It looked at newsletters. It gave him summaries. It was like, here's these newsletters that you do read frequently. Here's the summary. I think it recognized his reading patterns and said, like, you often don't read this one, that kind of thing. So it's kind of cool in one way, because it's kind of like, oh, this is like an assistant that I don't have to sit there. Because I mean, imagine like if you were the richest person in the world and you could like hire an assistant and you could be like, okay, I don't have the time or inclination to do XYZ. How about you go ahead and do all that and then you tell me about it. And with a human being, obviously you'd have to pay them. But with a human being, like, you kind of maybe have a few little fits and starts and then they'll figure it out and they'll get going. But with, some of this agentic AI, it can look at all of this information you've built about yourself online by utilizing things online. And it can, like analyze that stuff and say like, okay, now here's what I recommend you do next. And that's exciting in a lot of ways because I'm as lazy as the next guy. I love something that will get me out of like busy work, but it's also scary. It is also very worrisome. And it gives me a little bit of hope that it doesn't work, right? There was a podcast, and I need to catch up. I think I've missed a couple of episodes of it, but it's by a former Wired writer. I think he's an independent journalist now, and he basically started a company with only AI employees. And the results are horrifying and hilarious because nothing works. It doesn't work. You cannot deploy a company and utilizing AI agents and have them work together properly without a whole lot of Frankensteining systems together. Nothing works like that out of the box. I could promise you. And if any company is trying to do that, they're putting a lot of time, effort, and money into it. And again, chances are it's not working properly. So all this hype is, I go back to the fact this hype is overblown. So that's kind of where I'm at with AI right now. But I keep circling back to this idea, and I have actually seen it in print now. I think I have an article somewhere on my phone where I was like, oh, I got to read this, and I haven't read it yet. But this idea of the human in the loop is always going to be important. We have now, will we ever reach completely intelligent, like super intelligent AI? I don't know. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I be sitting here talking about artificial intelligence? I would have laughed in your face. So I don't know what's going to happen. But, at this point in time, the AI that we know, ChatGPT, is not probably ever going to be capable of what they say it is. That said, there are other forms of artificial intelligence training that are going on, both in the United States and globally. And those are the things that I am most curious about, maybe hopeful for, because who knows what wonderful invention might come about, and also very scared of. Because, I mean, China, I heard a while back, China was developing, kind of their version of ChatGPT, but they were doing it faster and cheaper, and it utilizes less intensive data center energy than ChatGPT does. So, and when I say ChatGPT, I'm kind of like, it's like saying Coke, but meaning all of the soft drinks. So when I say ChatGPT, I also mean Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, all that. So, but what, kind of long story short, what I go back to is that the human being is valuable because AI is not creative. We all know it takes what we have created and it spits it back out. That's the idea of generative. It scoops up the internet. It was trained on the internet. It was trained on input from humans that were willingly training it, and human beings that were unwillingly or unknowingly training AI. If you have an Alexa or a Siri or a Bixby or any of those, we all know you got to be careful with those terms of use agreements, because deep down in there, they had the right to listen and take your information and use it in ways that you probably didn't want. And now that you're probably aware of it, you may have changed your settings. So long story short, AI could not be without us. AI is us. And we have a long way to go before AI could literally replace a human being, because AI doesn't have reasoning, it doesn't have critical thinking, it doesn't have emotions. I mean, you can't replace those things. And that's kind of what's important about being human. And bottom line, to bring it back to like really what is Cake TV about? It's about textiles, a textile study. AI can't create artwork. We know this. It cannot take a raw material and go create something unique, truly 100% unique, like a human being can. And a human being can leave their fingerprints on it. And even if a human being is copying somebody else's art, there's still this aspect of unique fingerprints on it. Whereas AI can only take existing, put it in the blender, shake it up, and spit something out, and it's never going to have a true human fingerprint on it. And I maintain that in our future is going to be so important. Those of us who are artists and creators, if you have the slightest creative bone in your body, your abilities are going to be important. They're going to continue to be important, and they will be even more important one day, I believe. So fingers crossed that, somebody or something along the way doesn't just like destroy things and make it further dystopian. But I go back to the fact that we are resilient as humans. COVID pandemic, like we survived it as a species. Unfortunately we lost a lot of people. It was devastating to many people, but as a species, we're still here. Didn't wipe us off the planet. We continue to peck away at our infrastructure. And I still feel like AI is not going to be the end of us as long as we don't let it. So keep making stuff. And particularly if this is your first time here, everything you make with your hands and your mind, whether it be artwork, gardening, cooking, poems, writing, dance, jokes, anything that you can create and manipulate in the real world, has way more value than anything that AI can create. And I'll never come off that mound, and I will go to my grave saying that. So that's my AI update. All right. Enough about AI. I'm tired of thinking about AI right now. I want to talk about images on crazy quilts. And by virtue of what I did a little bit of research on some stuff on crazy quilts, I touched on Beaux Arts and I was like, how? This is like something I think I would like to get into here because it's something I don't know as much about, and I should. I went to art school, I minored in art history. I should be ashamed of myself. um, so I'm gonna start off with kind of the simple one. Because I had kind of two topics to talk about with crazy quilts. And we're going to look at, let's see. Uh, Let me make sure. I gotta make sure I'm on the right monitor. Okay. Yes. Why aren't you changing there? Hide that. Okay. So this is one of the blocks in my Emma Myers Crazy Quilt. This is the quilt I've been studying. Got it early last year from a descendant of Emma Myers. And you know, the quick story on it, if you haven't heard it, she is a friend of a friend. She appreciates the quilt. She's not a quilter, and she was concerned about, you know, just its storage in her house. She didn't know how to display it. It's not technically finished. It doesn't have finishing around the edges, and it doesn't have a back. And she really wanted to give it to a historical society, and she has a little bit of information about the maker. And the historical society was like, yeah, we don't have the space to take care of it. And I'm like, once I got the quilt, I was like, it's not that big. They just didn't want it. So she was looking for something else to do with it. And my friend suggested to her, I know a young upcoming quilt researcher. I mean, I still maintain I'm a baby researcher, but I work at it. And she said, would you be willing to, you know, let her have it and to do research? And so the owner graciously accepted, and they sent me this quilt. And it's a lovely quilt. The stitching on it is beautiful. It has very little damage. It's in really good condition. But it has some just really interesting stitching. It's dated. It's got a name. So those aspects about it are wonderful. And we know it's 1883. So, and I've been researching the history of the woman. And I'm not entirely sure she made it by herself. I'm at the point where I think she made the quilt with some other women. But as you would expect in any kind of garden variety crazy quilt, you've got all these little embroideries, and, you know, the various fabrics and stuff, and the imagery that we see. And of course, you know, there's in the 1880s, there's all kinds of, you know, they're very interested in, so it's Victorian era over in the UK. It's considered kind of the, you know, reconstruction to Gilded Age here in the US. So Gilded Age, you know, very Victorian. You know, I mean, I think if you have any appreciation for this time period, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But they were very interested in, you know, kind of the exotic stuff. So Japanese art, other types of Asian art. There was a point where Egyptology was really interesting, and of course Egypt got very big in the 20s when King Tut's tomb was opened. But you kind of have that Egyptology in the late 1800s is also very interesting to the people of the day. And sometimes they were just into some mundane things. So what we're looking at here is one of the blocks. And, you know, I mentioned sort of the Asian influence here because this is like a, you know, like an urn or a vase or something that they've embroidered here. And then we've got these two shoes, and they loved shoes for some reason. Well, I don't even want to say for some reason, because dang it, I love shoes too. So I get it. So there's two different types of shoes, and most people, you know, probably would recognize like a high top button up shoe that, you know, would have been very common in the last quarter of the 19th century and kind of early into the early 20th century. My great grandmother, I think I've seen pictures of one of my great grandmothers wearing these types of shoes turn of the century when she was a young woman. So very ubiquitous. Now, this one over here is a little bit different. This looks very fancy. But as soon as I saw this, I went, oh, that is a date and time kind of shoe. Very specific, fad. So let's look. I gotta find. Okay. So back in my historical costuming days, I followed this company and I've actually bought some of their shoes. I don't have this one. Although I have always admired this shoe. It's really pretty. And they've made a couple of different versions of it. But this is based on real shoes from, I believe it's LACMA, the Los Angeles Museum. Los Angeles, whatever. The Los Angeles History and Art. I don't know. It's in Los Angeles. So this is based on a real shoe. But would you guess, if you didn't really know anything about like this late 1800s Victorian era Gilded Age, this might be like, oh, never seen something like that. But these fancy shoes were quite a fad during this time period. And this is just, you can buy these today. They are, let's see, they're kind of pricey. I'm not gonna lie. Let's see where. Let's see, these are pre-order. $299, so $300 for these. I can say, I mean, because I have bought shoes from them before, their shoes are quite nice. They're 100% leather. If you buy the leather ones, they have the veggie leather ones too, but 100% leather. They're very, very, very well made, and they have, you can replace the bottom, like the stuff on the heel, and the soles are replaceable if like you wore them that much. I know some of the, well, I've seen their shoes in movies, but I know some of the historical reconstruction people or reenactors, like at Williamsburg and some of the other like living history places, do buy shoes from them, and they're absolutely the kind of shoes that can be resold as needed. So anyway, the woman that runs the company, Lauren, used to follow her and some of her employees, and I haven't lately, just because they're not doing quilts, and but she writes blogs, and some of the people that have worked for her have had like whole sites where they've talked about some of this information, and I think it is so fascinating, like to look at these shoes. And this is the pair that they're based on. So LACMA. What does LACMA stand for? So Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It was the C that was confusing me. So the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. So this pair is one they have. And the only thing that's different, I think, is these have this little bow. And I don't think that the ones from American Duchess do. No, they don't. They didn't put the bow on theirs. Although I kind of feel like the bow is kind of cute, So anyway, they call this the skeleton collection, which I thought was kind of interesting. And it looks like this is another pair of them, which I think is almost identical, just a different color. It says these are worn for a wedding. So you can imagine a wedding dress, especially if you were into period costumes and you wanted like a, late 19th century wedding dress. And oh, this would just be so fabulous. I would love it. Look at this. This is from the Shoe Icons Museum. I think I've looked at this before. But same thing with these like cutout strap things and then beads on the straps. Isn't that beautiful? And then this is a low top shoes that have the same thing, and they're calling them rib cage shoes. These are from the collection at the Met. So yeah, and these shoes actually button. I know there's some reproduction shoe companies that like it'll actually be like a snap or some other type of like closure under there, but these are literally like button type shoes. So if you were to buy them, you'd have to get a button hook too. Anybody that collects like old sewing things and old women's accoutrements probably has a bazillion shoe hooks. I know I do. I've used them in a whole bunch of my artwork because they have absolutely no purpose other than if you were to buy these types of shoes. Oh, here's another pair that's pretty. And now these are getting into some wider varieties. So these are from the 1900s to the 1920s. This pair is really cool. All those cutouts. I think American Duchess may have made something similar to this one as well. But in any event, this is something that, as American Duchess researched and documented, this was a fad during this period and for quite some time. I think about our fads today and, within a year, something could be like totally passe. Like, oh my God, that's so 2025. But, it looks like, the fads here may have lasted for 20 years or so and then kind of been readopted into the next century and, changed into like a low top shoe. So anyway, I thought this was so fun. And to have found this very shoe on this quilt was so cool. And I realized that this stitching here, it's probably about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches square. It's not very big. But you can very much imagine somebody thinking to themselves, I want to stitch something that's, fashionable or something that's pretty, and then they would have chosen these shoes. And you can imagine this one here. I haven't done a whole lot of research, but there were the boots that, had these different like toe caps and, maybe some, like little designs and things on them. Sometimes they would have, they could either be buttoned along the sides or they laced up and then had embroidery on them. And those would have been silk boots. I don't know that I've seen leather necessarily that had embroidery on them specific to these types of shoes. But they did make them in silk and, would have had, you could buy them with embroidery and stuff. So again, that's what I see in these. I see women that are like stitching and they're thinking like, okay, I'm going to put some shoes in my block. So I just love that. I thought that was so cool. So the next one is this, the owls. And this sent me down quite the rabbit hole. Now, first of all, these are painted. So they're painted onto velvet. And they have a little bit of thread or floss. And it's kind of been like it's frayed a little bit, but their beaks were made out of a separate floss. Now, I started doing the research on, what is the symbolism of owls, particularly in this period? And of course, that was a very broad research question, not a good one, because it gives me like all kinds of stuff. And I think that's also something really important and something that I think is useful to think about, in that if you want to do some research, it's really easy to hit a dead end when you get way too much information or not enough information. So it's refining a research question, especially with AI, is it's kind of I don't want to say it lost art. It's not a lost art. It's an art. It's something that, to be figured out, I guess. It's something you kind of have to practice. I just realized I didn't have this set to all full size. So in general, owls have two meanings. One is wise. An owl is a symbol of wisdom. Also, owls are symbols of death. And sometimes some of this is cultural, some of this is historical in terms of like which periods and which cultures viewed owls the way they view them. So as far as wisdom, Athena is associated with owls. And, Athena is associated with women's empowerment. So you've kind of got that aspect of it. Owls are also nocturnal creatures. So nighttime, Athena's also connected with the moon and nighttime. So kind of got all of these different um, ideas that can be connected with owls. Um, in terms of some of the old wives' tales about owls, I think it's if you hear a screech owl, and here in the US, screech owls are these very tiny little owls. They're actually really cute. They're very cute and sweet. My husband used to work for a wildlife program, and the screech owls I loved because they're so adorable. They're about the size of like a large songbird, and they're poofy though. So they're owls. In any event, they're just adorable. But they do make like a high pitched like screechy noise. And here in the U.S., there are a variety. There's a couple of different types of screech owls. And supposedly, if you heard a screech owl, that meant a baby would die. And if you heard a barn owl, B-A-R-N, not to be confused with a barred owl, which is a B-A-R-R-E-D. If you heard the barn owl, that meant a relative was dying. So it's kind of like, I think about those kinds of old wives' tales and I think, well, I mean, honestly, everybody was always dying back in the day when we didn't have antibiotics and, you know, good infectious disease prevention. And so it's pretty easy to associate, and owls are, whether you realize it or not, if you travel to kind of a rural area anywhere in the US, there are owls around, and you just don't see them or hear them, but they're there. And you know so I think about it at a time when everything was rural, and we didn't necessarily have as much noise and light pollution as we do now. It was probably very common to hear owls. And if you heard these specific types of owls, it's very, I mean, it's the coincidence. It's a coincidence, but I can understand how people would say like, oh no, I heard the screech owl. Somebody's baby has died. And by coincidence, it would be true. So wanting to know more, I said, all right, let me look at Crazy Quilts by Penny McMorris. And real quick, let me make sure I show you guys this book in case you haven't seen it. This is the book, Crazy Quilts by Penny McMorris. If you like crazy quilts, if you want to learn more about crazy quilts, this book is fabulous. It is, I'm going to say it's in the 90s. It was published. Might have been in the 80s. Let me see. 84. So sorry, it's a little older than I thought. So 1984. Really easy to find on the secondary book market. I think I got mine from Abe Books a long time ago. But such a good book. Penny McMorris is a wonderful writer. So I grabbed a couple of images. So let me find those. Let's see. I didn't open this earlier because I was waiting for them to upload. Okay, so here's one of the pictures she shows. And this one reminded me a lot of what the owls in my quilt, right? It says with the barn owls, I've heard all my relatives and then some would be dead. Right? I would imagine. I mean, I think that kind of knowing where you live, Rob, and I've been out there, on the California side of things. I definitely heard owls when I was out there. So yeah, these are very well painted, I think. But it's on the same. This is in the same vein, right? Yeah. Where'd the picture go? So this, and I'll come back to this in a sec. These are the other ones. We're from the owled country. O-W-L apostrophe D. So like the old country, but they've said the owled country. I thought that was cute. So they are a embroidered. This is possibly, it looks like it could have been an actual embroidery pattern that they got from someplace for this particular quilt. Maybe it was traced out of a newspaper or a magazine. It could have been like some kind of little joke cartoon. There's any of number of places where this imagery could have come from. So I thought this was cute, but let's go back to the painted one, because as I was looking at this, it says, let me read you what Penny McMorris says about owls first, and then I'll explain what this is. This type of painting. Velvet painting. Now it's the precursor to your Velvet Elvis. And so this is on page 55. And there's like a whole chapter here where she gets into all the different kinds of animals and things, the motifs on quilt. And so she has a special spot. Oh, whoops. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Thank you, Robin. I'm a dum-dum. Let me go back. Okay. Here we go. Sorry. Owled from the owled country. It is very cute, I have to say. I could picture this being like a little cartoon, like in a women's magazine, maybe. But it also could be like a legit like embroidery pattern that somebody could have bought, like a penny embroidery or something. So very cute. All right, so back to these, the Velvet Elvis owls. So owls. The owl is depicted on crazy quilts as a rather comical bird, more a figure to be poked fun at than to be looked up to as a symbol of wisdom. So that's interesting. So, you know, I've just told you all this stuff about owls equal wisdom, Athena, nighttime, possibly harbingers of death. But when we get to crazy quilts, they're being poked fun at, right? Many playful liberties were taken with the word owl in quilt slogans, such as, "Where have you been, owl summer?" This is a question that a stern mother owl, perched on a branch with her baby, asks of what is presumably the father owl, who has returned to the branch holding a fishing pole, complete with rodent dangling at the end of the line. Solitary owls, identified as females by the bonnets they wear, are labeled owled maid. Another pattern shows two owls above the saying, "We're from the owled country." Godey's, oh no, I'm sorry. I was getting excited for a second, but no. Godey's advertised an owl pattern in 1884 showing 4 owls sitting together on a tree branch, each reading an issue of the magazine. The typical owl on a crazy quilt is shown sitting either on a tree branch or on a crescent moon. So we've got the tree branch here. The crescent moon, of course, is a thing. In my owl, they've just got the tree branch, so no crescent moon. But I don't know that anything, because I do have a couple of other crazy quilts, and I'm thinking the really big one, I know has some owls. I think they are also on the branch that there's no crescent moon, but I have seen the owl and the crescent moon. That's very, very common imagery. So this specific, let me go back. So this specific one, it says, these are 3 owls, detailed from a crazy quilt by Flora Henrietta Schill Constans, circa 1885. These owls are an example of Kensington painting. So I'm like, well, what is Kensington painting? Well, thank goodness she defines Kensington painting, because when I Googled it, and Google and Gemini gave me completely inaccurate information, or not relevant information. So this is what she says about Kensington painting. This is starting on page 20 and going on to page 21 of Crazy Quilts by Penny McMorris. So painting. Painting on fabric was a popular pastime and was used to decorate screens, curtains, panels in window shutters, fancy work items, and even clothing. And I have seen some painted jackets from the late 1800s that are really cool. In addition to crazy quilt patches, some women created original landscapes and portraits of family members or pets. And some saw painting on the fabric patches as a quick alternative to embroidery. True, yeah. I painted flowers on some of the blocks. They are much prettier than embroidery and not so much work, one woman wrote. Those who wanted a painted effect quickly could use sheets of paper that had been specially printed with oil color designs. These could be moistened and transferred to the fabric by pressing with a hot iron. So this is the early form of iron-on transfers. During this period, a method called Kensington painting was developed in an attempt to imitate the stitching in Kensington embroidery. Kensington painting was quite different from other methods of painting because it was usually done with a pen rather than a brush. So let's look at this closely. The pen was turned over so the paint could be scooped up and held in the hollow of the pen point as it was drawn across the fabric. This technique deposited paint on the fabric in thick lines resembling stitches. Smaller stitches were scratched in with the pen tip or a needle. Manufacturers were quick to take advantage of the popularity of Kensington painting by introducing pens with 3, 5, or 7 points, made especially for scratching the paint. A full Kensington painting kit consisting of 30 tubes of oil paint, brushes, palette, pens, and a sample of work could be ordered for $6. So, I mean, you could kind of see this. I think that this is a very good, the person that painted this, I think, was pretty skilled. And so you can see kind of these little strokes. To me, they do look like brush strokes, but I can kind of see like, some of this manipulation looks like it could have been done with like the tip of something, right? And these really fine lines make sense that it might be a little bit of paint on the end of a sharp point versus a brush. So this is interesting. And I don't know that this necessarily looks all that much like stitching to me, in this, at least in this particular one. Let's see, go back here. And same thing here. Now I think these are good. I don't think it's, quite as like quote unquote photorealistic as the other owls. Neither of them are. But and I think the inclusion of this piece of thread to do the beak, I think was a mistake, because I think they would probably have looked a little cuter without that, since that frayed. But yeah, I mean, I see it. You can see these little marks that do appear like they were done with something metal versus, and you could see the cat hair on here. This is a pretty small little painting. But you could see that these are kind of scraped into the velvet versus, a paintbrush. And that makes sense to me. And if you look at this, which I think this is supposed to be some leaves, it does look like it's the point of something that has sort of scraped this into the velvet. Just doot, 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 doot. Right? So, yeah. Now, as I was looking at this, I said, you know what these owls remind me of? The owl bar at the Belvedere. So this is where I go down rabbit holes, but it all comes together, right? So the owl bar in Baltimore is at the Belvedere Hotel. And the Belvedere Hotel, so the current website for the owl bar calls it the original speakeasy. So the owl bar opened at the Belvedere in 1903, the end of 1903. So a little bit later than my crazy quilt, but we're still talking about the same general time period, right? And when we get to Prohibition, that's when the owls become important at this bar. At the very beginning, it was just called like the bar. It didn't have a name. But so, okay. So this is what Atlas Obscura has to say about the Belvedere Hotel. So the Belvedere Hotel itself opened its doors on December 14th, 1903. It became Baltimore's first luxury hotel. Off the posh lobby of the Beaux Arts style building was the Owl Bar, then simply known as the Bar, or the Bar Room. Because it served alcohol, admission was restricted to men. The bar quickly became one of the city's most popular and notorious watering holes, frequented by clientele ranging from businessmen and politicians to bookies and gangsters. And the Belvedere itself really figures prominently in Baltimore city culture. It was a place where, in my studies of Dr. Dutton, in his letters, he, talks to and has mentioned the Belvedere as, meeting somebody at the Belvedere because that's where they stayed when they visited, or going to the Belvedere for, some type of event, having dinner there or whatever. It was, it's like thinking about being in New York and going to the Plaza, or something like that. It's one of those like special places. Now today it is an apartment building. And although there are still event space there in the bottom and the bar itself, there's also a bar and lounge up on the very top. I think it's the 13th floor. I think that's at one time what it was called. I don't think it's still called that, but so it's still like a prominent place in Baltimore. Now since then, there's all kinds of interesting things about the Belvedere. There's of course like the stories, because you're talking about politicians, gangsters, all this kind of stuff. There was a pretty major death that happened at the Belvedere back in, I think it was 2006 or 2007. Ronaldo Rivera, who had only lived here in Baltimore very briefly, he was a water polo coach, I think at Johns Hopkins, and there's still mystery behind what happened, but it appears he jumped off the building and fell through the roof of an adjacent part of the Belvedere, and he wasn't found for a week. And so, I mean, you can imagine. And they really don't exactly know what happened. So if you're a true crime person, look up the Belvedere. You'll find that story. I think they covered it on Unsolved Mysteries, the reboot of Unsolved Mysteries. They covered it. So Belvedere's pretty famous. But back to the owls. I'd always known this story. And I think it's part of this really charming history. So you can see there are these stained glass pieces. They're lit from the back. Now here's the building itself. You can see I have pictures of myself there because I went to 2 separate events there for a company I used to work for, and I have pictures of myself with the Belvedere in the background. I just couldn't find them. But this is the view as you go in. That's the restaurant area, and then you go in, and here's the bar. And it is beautiful in there. It's very dark. It's hard to take pictures. This is probably the best view of everything. So you've got these 2 stained glass pieces, and then the owls are actually sitting on these pillars here. They're really hard to see. When they were first, these particular owls were first brought, these statues were first brought into the owl bar. They sat actually at the cash register. And this is what they have to say. So stained glass windows backlit behind the bar feature images of owls and the following nursery rhyme. A wise old owl sat in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. So that's this one. This one over here says, the less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we all be like that wise old bird? So it's a nursery rhyme. And it says, the simple rhyme assumed additional significance with the onset of Prohibition on January 17th, 1920. And for the next 13 years, the bar operated as a speakeasy and served bootleg liquor to its known patrons. And so the owls served as like the speakeasy, like secret code. So if you went in there and the eyes were lit up with amber, and they say this in this Atlas Obscura article. So let me just read it to you. The owner, his name is Colonel Consalvo. So imagine that. I mean, think about politicians, gangsters, and this guy's name is Colonel Consalvo. He added to the bar's owl-themed decor when he brought in 2 large plaster owl statues and placed them on the cash registers. The owls were named Sherry Bell and John Eager Howard. No idea where those names come from. I've never found that. I'm sure it's somewhere. I'm sure they know why somewhere, but they name Howard. The name Howard is kind of like, Howard University is down in DC. There's Howard Street. I think Howard is a name that is kind of normal around here, but I don't know if it's relating to a famous person or not. But anyway, so these plaster owls had electric glass eyes that signaled the availability of contraband whiskey. An amber eye on each owl would blink when the hotel's basement had liquor and the coast was clear of law enforcement. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the owls mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't really so mysterious. Like, the place shut down and the owner took them. So in the 70s, it reopened and the owls came back. And I think that's the point when they were mounted up on this upper back part, where you can see them now. What Atlas Obscura does not say, but what I have heard, is that the eyes would blink amber if, you could come in safely to get a drink. If the eyes were red, that means we're not serving because the cops are around, or the cops have just been here, or we've heard there's a raid imminent. So the Atlas Obscura did not go into that part of the story, but that is what I have heard. And I kind of believe that. I mean, maybe it seems like the amber eye maybe would have been enough, but I kind of feel like the fact that this story has talked about a red eye too, kind of makes sense to me. But anyway, it's this is what it is, and this is pretty much what it looks like today. So, but as I was reading this, and this is how the falling down rabbit holes goes, I said, so the Belvedere is a Beaux Arts building. What is the deal with the Beaux Arts? Well, we are surrounded, at least on the East Coast, by Beaux Arts architecture. And really throughout, so I think any part of the United States, as we were expanding, Manifest Destiny, as we were expanding into places like Chicago, and I think there's a few places in California. California's got a very specific architectural style, but I think there are some Beaux Arts buildings there. But Colorado, Chicago, like I said, some other places, like I think that, like in Missouri, Kansas City, like there's a lot of Beaux Arts architecture in cities that were coming up and becoming larger cities at this time period. So, and the time period I'm talking about is end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So basically the Beaux Arts, just a quick synopsis, it is the architecture of the Gilded Age. And LA gave us Google. Right? Hey, Kenny. So the Gilded Age, and it basically what the Google has told me, I asked for the synopsis through Gemini, and what it told me is it's approximately 1880 to 1930. So actually a little bit later than I thought. But it's this Gilded Age. This is the time period I'm talking about with these crazy quilts. So I think it, as place and time, you can put your mind in, like, right? The crazy quilt, this building, like it all comes together. So what is Beaux Arts? So Beaux Arts is a style that developed in Paris in the early 1800s. So like 1830s, I think, is when the École des Beaux Arts, so basically the Beaux Arts school, opened in Paris earlier in the 1800s. And you've got a lot of European architecture, just gobs of it, like every major European city. So Madrid, Rome, all over the UK, Vienna, trying to think of some of the other ones. I mean, it's really all over Europe. Your big cities coming up during this time, lots of Beaux Arts influence. Now, for it to come across to the US, that was later in the 1800s. And if you're familiar with the White City in Chicago, which was the 1893, the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and they called this the White City because it was this whole thing they built, and all of that architecture was Beaux Arts. There's a good chance that whatever city you live in has Beaux Arts. So some of the U.S. architecture, I started looking. Yep, Beaux Arts, Art Nouveau, Art Deco. And honestly, Beaux Arts, kind of like Art Nouveau and Art Deco, they kind of dovetail with Beaux Arts a little bit. And I would say the owl bar, particularly, some of the imagery for the owl bar here, some of this art, it's kind of like arts and crafts / Art Nouveau, definitely. Yeah. And Mission, that, all that stuff is developing, as we go farther west, and kind of sticking in places like California. I do know that. But some of the places here in the U.S. That Beaux Arts buildings, Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library is Beaux Arts. The Carnegie Library, a whole bunch of colleges and universities. I would say most of the East Coast is probably like any kind of government buildings that are old, um, universities that have older buildings. It's Beaux Arts. And so what's the question is, what exactly is Beaux Arts? Well, it's like this mashup of classical styles. So it's both Roman and Greek, and they've mashed it up. And so you get things like big pillars, and you get those pediments, those big kind of squashed triangular pediments. Think about any of the architecture that you might have seen in Washington D.C., some of the government buildings. Now, when you look at things like the Capitol and the White House, those are very specifically like neoclassical architecture. It's a little different than the Beaux Arts. But let me show you. Oh, let me get this. This is Wikipedia. Um, so Oh, Brazil. Brazil has a bunch. um, this was getting into South America. So, like, these are all of the Beaux Arts era architects in the US. I mean, it's just a ton of them. But these are some of the buildings. So the Library of Congress, the Willard Hotel in DC, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Grand Central Terminal in New York, New York Public Library, Union Station in DC. They're not showing that, but Union Station in DC. It says the San Francisco War Memorial Opera House here. So you see that it's like this mashup. So you've got like these archway kind of things, but you've got columns, and then you've got like the neoclassical statues kind of all over everything. Yeah, it's kind of a mashup. And so, look at something like our Capitol building. It's very like it's very Spartan compared to this. But you could kind of see some of the similarities when you look at, columns and some of the shapes and things. So that's essentially what Beaux Arts is. Honestly, as I looked through this, and then I looked on some other websites, as I was reading through this, there is so much stuff here in the US that's considered Beaux Arts. It's like I said, it's almost like it's either neoclassical or it's Beaux Arts if it's old. And I think in other big cities, like especially in Europe, certainly they have some really old stuff there, like ancient churches and things like that. But anything that was created kind of as part of the Industrial Revolution, from early 1800s on, probably falls in this category if it's, again, that sort of neoclassical mashup, but encrusted with stuff. It's just such a huge category. And that's kind of why we hear about it. I'm just looking through here. I mean, like, so buildings in the US, Columbia University, University of California at Berkeley, the US Naval Academy here in Maryland, Carnegie Mellon University, University of Texas. Let's see. Let's see. The construction of the Carolines Chateau south of San Francisco was built to withstand earthquakes following the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake. I mean, it's like you just can't get rid of it. You can't get away from it. So, apparently it was the railroads, of course, coming through. That was a big deal. So they also are all Beaux Arts because they're all being built at this time period. So, sort of in the same way, I always think of when the interstate highway system came about in the 1950s. We sort of like that whole Route 66 kind of like in that sort of atomic age. You've kind of got that sensibility, like that culturally, that all of that kind of encompasses. In the 30s and 40s, the war years, things are a little bit stagnant because they are the war years, but some of the architecture and arts in there are, like Kenny's written, some information here, like, getting into mission style arts and crafts. There's kind of a small little compact time period there. So yeah, Beaux Arts. I don't know much more to say about it other than, like, next time you're out and about in a big city, look around. identify some stuff and say, is that Beaux Arts? And you probably can, probably look at it and identify it now. You know, just, when you see what I mean? We've got crusty statues, we've got pillars, and we've got archways. This is the, let's see, this is the main branch, but this is like the back entrance. This isn't, oh no, I'm sorry. This is the front entrance. This is where the lions are. Anyway. So, oh yeah, again, he's got a bunch. Let's see. Adolphus Hotel in Dallas. Okay. Bradbury in LA. Oh, okay. Bradbury in LA is an Italian Renaissance. I'm not familiar with the Bradbury. You know, as many times as I've been to Los Angeles, there's like, I really and truly don't know the landmarks very well. All right. Had enough of my rambling. All right, so we still have some time to get into our book, but before that, I wanted to tell you guys about this book, From Fiber to Fabric. It just came today, so I haven't had a chance to really read it yet. However, I didn't know about this book. I was at an AQSG event very recently, and somebody had asked a question, and another person answered it by saying, oh, Harriet Hargrave covered that, or Hargrave covered that in her book, From Fiber to Fabric. And I'm like, I haven't heard of this book. Why have I not heard of this book? I don't know why I hadn't heard of this book. It's a very good book. It was published by C&T. You can find it online. It was published in 1997. But I think it's, again, pretty easy to find reprints of it, or, you know, used copies of it. It's still out there. But it gets into like all the interesting stuff. So all of these books that I have accumulated recently, getting into some of these historical techniques. You know, I talked about like exactly how they did that ombre rainbow fabric back in the 1840s. Well, I finally found the books that have the pictures of the machines. Well, here we've got the modern machines, which I love this. This is I'm so excited to have found this book. Because it's really specific to cotton and quilting fabric is really what she's focusing on. But, you know, she does touch on, you know, polyester and wool and silk a little bit, you know, because they're relevant, and particularly polyester. But she talks about like all kinds of things that, you know, we often worry about when we're working with, say, antique fabric, or we bought a quilt and want to wash it, or just, you know, and I would say especially now, especially that people are doing a lot of upcycling. And, you know I'm not the only one using fabric that I've bought, you know, off of eBay or gotten at a thrift store or whatever. So using old fabrics. And so she talks about, you know, all of these sort of experiments she did with different detergents, and how, you know, color running, and how to check fabric for, you know, is it gonna rub off? Are you gonna spend a lot of time making a quilt from this old fabric and then find out you made a dire mistake? She's got you covered. So I am very much looking forward to looking more at this book. And, you know, I think in our future, definitely got to be a little bit down the road, but in our future, I think we will have some comparisons between the old technologies and the new technologies as I read through this. So very excited, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in this more of like the technical aspects of fabric and how it comes to be, add this to your library. I think it cost me less than $10, I think. Anyway, okay. Let us get to American quilts. So I feel like I've been going really slowly in this book. There was one part in here the other day I had a hard time reading. I think I told you, because it's the lovely way that they've printed the stuff here. It's fabulous, but I'm like, it's actually made it hard to read, I realized. So yeah. Sorry, bear with me a sec while I sort of recombobulate my screens here. Oh, okay. So it was shrouded, but it was used in Blade Runner. You know, I'm terrible. I have not seen Blade Runner. I know as a nerd and a science fiction aficionado, like that is shameful for me to say. It's probably one of my husband's favorite movies, but I've never seen the whole thing. So I don't know that that helps me necessarily. Okay. So let us get to pictures from this book. Okay, where we left off, we are in part 2, which is the manufacture of textiles used in American quilts. And so she's talked about, you know, a number of things gotten through kind of Revolutionary War period, etc. And as a reminder, we are reading Elizabeth Wells Robertson is her full name. The book is American Quilts. I don't have the dust jacket on it, but it's American Quilts. It was published in 1948. And it's a thin volume, but my gosh, it is packed. I guess the text is small. And we are at a point right now, all of the stuff we're reading about is kind of paralleling some of the things that we already read about when we read The Heritage of Cotton. And in a little bit of like when we read the Chintz book, she references the Chintz book in here. I can't remember. Did she reference The Heritage of Cotton? Let's see. Yes, she did reference The Heritage of Cotton as well. So we've read some of the earlier books that she's referenced. So, you know, some of this is kind of the same old information, but I do love the fact that we get this refresher. Robin says, now I have a reason to watch Blade Runner. Yeah. I will put it on my to-do list. I've got 2 books that I'm listening to right now, and I've got kind of 2 big projects I'm working on. So, yeah. All right, I'm already seeing some problematic language in this section we're getting ready to read. Ooh. So, spoiler alert. Let's remember this book was written in 1948. Okay, so as a reminder, we are reading American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson, published in 1948. We are in part 2. And so we can look at, this is Slater's Mill. So this section is called Samuel Slater, the Father of the American Textile Industry. How it was that Samuel Slater, a young mechanical genius, left England and came to America is recorded in the following way. One of the Philadelphia papers came to his attention in which there was a mention of an award for anyone succeeding or partially succeeding in constructing a carding machine. Remember, all of these different machines are relevant to being able to utilize cotton from the bowl to literally weaving. Any holes in that process made it hard for the U.S. to have its own industry. So constructing a carding machine. Apprenticed to a partner of Arkwright, we know his name, and now superintendent of the mill, young Slater was filled with new ambition. He carefully memorized in detail the plans for the Arkwright machines and secretly made plans to emigrate. It's a mystery. It's a spy. After arriving in this country, he looked around for the best opportunities available to him. With the knowledge he possessed, he found New York unsatisfactory, but came in contact with Mr. Moses Brown of the firm Almy and Brown of Providence. So Providence, Rhode Island, I assume. And yes, because yes, if you look at the picture, it's in Providence, Rhode Island. For a price, he promised Brown to construct a machine based on the principle of Arkwright's. But he made the provision that if it did not work, he would make no charge for his material or his time. Brown bargained with Slater and eventually took him into the firm, making it Almy, Brown, and Slater. And the mill at Pawtucket, sorry, not Providence, Pawtucket, already referred to, was started. So great was the secrecy maintained while the work of building the machinery was in progress that all the construction was done behind closed shutters. A water frame of 24 spindles was made, 2 carding machines, and the frames necessary for the spinners. A necessary ironwork was forged by Wilkinson, whose daughter later became Slater's wife. At the very first, and this is where I'm going to change the text a bit because we're using a not very politically correct term here. But the power was supplied by an old man, but water power was later installed. So this sounds like the power supply. This was, I think, essentially like an old man who was like literally moving a mill wheel, whatever, like human power. But then the water later took over. And typically that's why mills are built on places like sources of water, because you could harness the water then to turn the mill wheel, etc. I mean, this is, to us today, this is pretty elementary, but back then it was truly cutting edge, I guess. I mean, the whole idea of water powered, it's been around for quite some time, but this was industrial revolution. This is where we're automating things. So his project was a tremendous success, and Slater became the acknowledged founder of the American textile industry. At the start, because labor was hard to find, only children were employed at the mill. Wow, Slater, we're really on the right side of history, aren't we? These children were from 8 to 14 years old and received from $1.30 to $1.40 each week. The indoor work was hard and disciplinary measures were required. That sounds so icky. But in 1793, Slater started what was reputably the first Sunday school in America. Well, that's nice. So, you can work 6 days a week, slave over whatever, this wheel. And then your children get to go to Sunday school, I guess, on Sunday. Out of these beginnings, whole families were soon employed, and this led to the convergence of groups of people wholly dependent upon the mill. So this is the idea of your mill town. So, people are coming to work there. They're setting up, a household there. And then this is growing into what we, today or into the 20th century would have recognized as like the company towns or the mill towns. I have relatives that lived in mill towns down in the Carolinas. So this is something that's not, the whole idea of this is not out of the realm of our recent history. Slater produced so much yarn that marketing it soon became a problem. Commission houses sprang up, and agents or merchants were employed to dispose of the yarn to individual women for the purpose of weaving fabrics for everyday wear upon their own looms at home. These commission houses appeared in such cities as Salem, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. So these would have been like, I guess she's calling them commission houses, but I would say this is probably like a piecework situation. They're given the yarn, they need to weave it, and then probably return the product. If all credit goes to Samuel Slater for establishing the Arkwright machine in America, thereby making it possible to produce warp from cotton instead of linen, to Mrs. Slater goes credit for the first cotton sewing thread produced by her on her own spinning wheel. This was the start of a great new industry in itself. So now we're moving from a heavier weight product, a yarn, that goes to warp a loom that would have been used to weave coverlets and possibly some clothing fabrics, etc., to thread, which is much, 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 much finer. The success of Slater and his American use of the Arkwright machines became famous throughout the country, and men who worked with him went out to build their own mills and establish their own fortunes. Many of these mills were successful, but others failed for one reason or another. One mill was built at Warwick, Rhode Island, a second in Pawtucket, and another in Cumberland, Rhode Island. One of Slater's Pawtucket mill hands built the first cotton mill in New Hampshire. So it seems like you have this like kind of family. People kind of move out and build their own mills. Indeed, it has been said that within 3 years after the completion of Slater's first mill in 1791, 10 mills were established in Rhode Island and one in Connecticut. By 1809, there were no less than 87 mills in eastern states. So this is New England. I don't think we've got anything weaving quite that early down here. I don't think. But yeah, so we're talking within like 20 years. We've gone from 1 to 87. As these mills continued their increase in output, home weaving was no longer able to keep pace. Power looms had not yet been introduced, and the inevitable overproduction of yarn occurred. Moses Brown became very much alarmed and wrote to Slater, "Thee must shut down thy gates, or thee will spin all my farms into cotton yarn." Some sort of remedy had to be found, but strangely enough, when plans for a power loom were later offered to Slater, he refused them. John Slater, a brother of Samuel, came to America in 1803 and brought with him new ideas and a knowledge of improvements in English machinery. Oh, these Slater brothers and their espionage. He set out to find a site for a mill and decided upon a place called Smithfield, which was later called Slatersville. John joined his brother's company, and in 1807, Almy, Brown, and Slater began spinning at Slatersville. John Slater was less conservative than Samuel and was enthusiastic about every new invention. When William Gilmore approached him with plans and models for a power loom, John gave him great encouragement. However, Samuel was much more loath to yield to new ideas, and he turned William Gilmore away. If Samuel Slater had listened to his brother, he not only would have been the first to construct a mill with spinning machines, but also with power-driven looms. The whole process could then have been completed under one roof. William Gilmore, though unsuccessful in selling his ideas to the Slaters, carried them to Judge Daniel Lyman of North Providence. By his acceptance of Gilmore's offer to build a power loom, another milestone had been reached from which all mill owners benefited. Samuel Slater not only achieved great wealth for himself and his associates, but placed cotton manufacturing in the United States on a permanent basis. Next, he started to make wool yarn, and at the time of the War of 1812, he was without doubt the leading manufacturer in the United States. While the Slaters and Gilmore had made great improvements, excuse me, I'm going to take a little drink here. While the Slaters and Gilmore had made great improvements in spinning and weaving in the eastern states, Eli Whitney, we know what he did, in 1792 had invented the cotton gin, and the South was spinning its own cotton industry. It was developing its own cotton industry. And she's got a little footnote here about the cotton gin. She says the cotton gin is an invention which removed the seed from the bowl. It is said that before Whitney made this, it took a man a year to do what Whitney could do in a day. I think that's a little overblown, because having processed cotton myself by hand, it is tedious. It is difficult, but I think once you get the hang of it, you can move pretty quickly. Now I've been to reenactments and I've seen a cotton gin in action, and it does work quickly. But I don't know that you could do in one day what it would take a person to do in a year. I feel like that's a little bit overblown, but who am I? But doing a little bit of, exploratory and experimental archaeology. Thomas Jefferson spoke of employing in his own household 2 spinning jennies, a carding machine, and a loom with a flying shuttle, by which were made more than 2,000 yards of cloth a year for his family and servants. In a letter he said, "The 4 southernmost states made a great deal of cotton. Their poor are almost entirely clothed in it in winter and summer. It is as well manufactured as the calicos of Europe." Well, isn't that nice how the poor got to wear cotton in the winter? A visit to Mount Vernon is not complete without a study of the weaving house built for George and Martha Washington's weavers. Letters show the meticulous accounts kept by President Washington pertaining to all work. The bedrooms revealed the work and the good taste of the First Lady, for on her bedsteads were coverlets and quilts made by her servants under her direction. The first mill in the world where the whole process of cotton manufacturing was carried on by power was that of the Boston Manufacturing Company, incorporated at Waltham in 1813 and known as the Waltham Company. But the Boston Manufacturing Company, which was incorporated at Waltham and known as the Waltham Company. Okay, that was a little confusing. This grew out of visits to the mills of Scotland and England by Francis Cabot Lowell. Oh, Lowell. Now there's a name that sounds familiar out of the Boston area. Here again, the founders of the mills had no mechanical drawings to guide them. Lowell himself invented a power loom, which in 1816 turned out cotton material a yard wide, so 36 inches. That does not stay the standard, though. I know that because I have fabric from the late 1800s, and it's much narrower than that. So this looked like the unbleached cotton made in India, which had been imported in great quantities for a number of years. The company had great competition from England, but prospered well in spite of this. A new mill was built on the site, eventually named Lowell, which, as is known, has become one of the most important textile centers to the U.S. Now, in 1948, I would imagine that there were still mills working in Lowell, which is right outside of Boston. Certainly, the mills down in the Carolinas were, in the war years, were very active. So, she's writing about this from a time period where, we haven't shifted to overseas production yet. So, oh, thanks, Robin. Thank you for filling in for Druid today. I know things need to get done. I feel you. So I hope the rest of your day is great. I'll talk to you soon. So you know what? Actually, I'm looking at this. I think we can make it. Let's finish off this chapter. So this next section is called Social Conditions of the American Factory Worker. As the textile industry grew and prospered, great changes occurred simultaneously in the nation. During the colonial period and up to about the beginning of the 19th century, textiles were a home craft. Then the introduction of the machine turned the rivers and waterfalls of New England into the power that manipulated spinning frames and looms. Great opportunity was offered to the inventive genius of the people. Quiet, calm New England changed from the great shipping center it had become to crowded, noisy manufacturing communities, which developed rapidly. Money poured into the mill owners' hands, and still more money came. The clear blue skies of villages were clouded by the smoke of busy factories. Inevitable social changes were brought about by the newly developed factory system. At first, in Pawtucket, Slater employed sons and daughters of his friends and neighbors. He had a fatherly, personal interest in his employees. Children were put to work. Of the first 9 youngsters employed, 7 were boys and 2 were girls, ranging in age from 7 to 12 years. Soon, there were over 100 children from 4 to 10 years of age working full-time at Slater's Mill. Can you imagine being a 4-year-old with a full-time job? I mean, this is so absurd. As the industry grew, more help was needed. As far as possible, the Rhode Island system of employment, as Slater's system was called, was to employ whole families. These families were paid in goods supplied by the company and not in cash. Aha! That's that little company town idea of like, you're indebted to your employer because everything you get, they give you, and there's no money. You don't have enough money to leave the situation. You're always kind of tied to this employer. As long as the mill was operating, everyone was taken care of. But when work became scarce, entire families were without supplies and great hardships resulted. The Waltham system of employment was different to Slater's. When Francis Cabot Lowell introduced it in his mill, he realized that he must have adult workers, and the only adults unemployed were women. The sole exception to employed women at this time was the poorly paid school teacher. In order to attract women to his factory, Lowell opened boarding houses operated by the company, and girls from farms poured into the mills because of the economic independence offered to them. These, of course, are called the Lowell girls, and they have a whole fascinating history. Some remained long enough to become valuable permanent operators, but many were tempted only by what seemed to them to be an opportunity to broaden their social experience or to earn enough money to buy a greatly coveted trousseau. So they were just trying to get themselves to a point where they have that trousseau and they can get married. Many workers became discouraged and returned to the farms because as time went on, conditions in the Waltham system deteriorated. Are we surprised? No, we are not. Native-born mill workers were replaced by Irish and French Canadians who were willing to work for less money. Then, in turn, and for similar reasons, were driven out by emigrants from Poland, Bohemia, and Italy. So Bohemia, of course, being the area of like Austria and Germany. They're kind of in the middle of Europe. These people were unfamiliar with American standards of living. They were satisfied to live in crowded tenements, cheap flats, and small houses supplied by the mill owners. Slums resulted as the mill cities increased in population, and laws to fix responsibility and avert abuses of various kinds became necessary. Wow, does this sound familiar, doesn't it? Wages and hours were gradually fought for. It is not easy to imagine the frightful conditions of extreme poverty which existed for the factory workers of this time. In 1843, Dr. Josiah Curtis reported to the American Medical Association on conditions existing in Lowell and Boston. The dwellings of the poor are mostly filthy, often from neglect on the part of the landlords, who get large rents and do not provide suitable drains, privies, yards, etc. The number of families in a house varies with the number of rooms. I have found from 6 to 40 or more in one house of 2 stories, 11 and more in one room constantly, and 8 in one bed. My God, how big is the bed for 8 people to be in it? I mean, I'm thinking of a king size bed. You got 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. Like, oh God, and the bed probably wasn't that big. Dr. Henry Clark made a similar report concerning Boston. Among other places described was a cellar which served as a home for 39 people. Wow. The Lowell Mills had originally been established by men who were sincerely desirous of maintaining a high standard of morals and right living among their employees. But from about 1840 onward, as the stocks of the corporation became more widely distributed, the attitude changed from an individual sense of responsibility to disinterested desire for profits. And this is when your mill owners become kind of, I guess, dovetailed with the robber barons of our time period, our Gilded Age. The railroads, the oil guys, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, all those people. You know what I'm talking about, the Carnegies. This is when, desire for profit takes precedence. And I mean, my gosh, do we not talk about this constantly today? Right, wrong, or indifferent. Capitalism at its finest, right? Moreover, although the foreign element had not yet entered the factories to any great extent, the fact that many girls became enamored of the low life and its freedom, and others had failed to save their money, the fact that many girls became enamored of the low life and its freedom, and others had failed to save their money, and for one reason or another were unable to return home, tended to form a permanent factory population and labor supply. This gave the factory owners an advantage in dealing with strikes and increased their power over the mill hands. As the prosperity of the mills increased, they became more and more crowded with workers, and conditions deteriorated still further. As stated in Curtis's medical reports, the air in the rooms where the girls worked, which ought to undergo an entire change hourly, remains day after day, and every month after month, with only the precarious change open doors occasionally give. There being no ventilation at night, the imprisoned condition of many of the rooms in the morning is stifling and almost intolerable to unaccustomed lungs. Sounds awful. After the day's work is ended, 2 hours released is enjoyed, a part of which is frequently spent in a crowded lecture room, and then they retire to dormitories, scarcely better ventilated than the mills. From 4 to 6, and sometimes 8, are confined during the night in a single room of moderate dimensions. I mean, this is like, that the Lowell situation, all these mills. I mean, this stuff is all pretty extensively documented. There's been a lot of there's been some archaeology there at the different mills. There's been the Lowell girls, as they called them, the factory workers. They actually had they even created a newspaper basically that they wrote for. And so there's a lot of information about this. And I mean, these are human rights violations that we're reading about here. I mean, the number of people and the terrible conditions. When we put people in prisons today, this kind of stuff doesn't fly because it's a human rights violation. And like, I don't like to get political, but again, we look at, detention centers of various types and we hear these same kind of things. And I mean, simple science tells you that when you crowd a lot of any being into a space, whether it's humans or animals, things don't go well. People and animals need a little bit of breathing room and they need fresh air. They can't be healthy without these things. So in such mills as had now adopted the Waltham system, the mill hands were considered more as part of the mill machinery than as human beings. This is tragic. In 1885, the manager of the largest mill in Fall River said that so long as the hands were able to work, he would get all that he could out of them. And when they gave out and could not work any longer, he replaced them as he would worn out parts of the machines. I mean, this is just... I mean, you see this attitude probably in the descendants of some of these men, right? The Fall River Petition of 1842 stated that in consequence of the influx of foreign laborers whose habits of cheap living enabled them to work at very low prices, the wages of the workmen in many of the departments of the manufacturing establishments were reduced so low as to be wholly insufficient to enable them to obtain for themselves and their families the necessities and conveniences of life. The exodus of the American worker began at Fall River, Rhode Island, and at Lowell. In the period of 1840 to 1850, the labor movement had been entirely defensive. It was an effort to provide a certain standard of living, a decent outlook on life, and social well-being for the man and the woman who offered themselves as workers to the new industrialism which no one as yet understood. In 1850, agitation for the 10-hour law began to get into politics and labor became an integral part of the whole humanitarian movement of the time. And that is the end of part 2. Yeesh! Wow. Okay, so on Monday we will get to part 3, and here's where we get into some of the more fun topics, where she's going to start talking about different types of fabric that are used in quilts. And so I can see some of the topics in here are very similar to the book I just showed you, which is kind of exciting. So, Elizabeth Robertson's going to explain kind of briefly each of these topics, and then Harriet Hargrave's book has like some of the modern details, and there's a lot of this information. We touch upon this stuff over and over, so this is exciting. I am excited for Monday. All right, so I'm gonna call it there. What did I do with my bookmarks? They got away from me. So I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Robin already gave the goodbye message, which I love. She always says to have, be well and happy and ease and enough. I mean, those are the things I love. I love that she says that. And I wish that for everybody. So I hope your weekend is wonderful, whether you are in a warm place or a cold place. I hope the weather is wonderful and you have a chance to relax and read, watch movies such as Blade Runner. And get some sewing done if you are so inclined. So have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Mwah! Bye, guys.